On tonight's edition of Politicat, healthcare returns, the AHCA moves to the Senate. Tell it to Congress, Sally Yates testifies. And grand ole shakeup, Senate Republicans prepare for a leadership change. All that and more on Politicat. It's your politics right now. Good evening and welcome to Politicat. I'm your host, Andrew Merica. Tonight we'll be joined by Edmund Bannister of the Political Union and Evan Whittort of College Republicans. But first, today's headlines. An active search for a new FBI director is taking place as President Trump fired now former FBI Director James Comey just hours ago. The White House released a statement today citing recommendations written to the president by Attorney General Jeff Sessions and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. This comes after a clarification issued by the FBI on a statement made by Comey about the Hillary Clinton email investigation. Comey was appointed by President Obama in 2013 and was 3 years into a 10-year term. He is the first FBI director to be fired by the president since 1993, when William Sessions was dismissed for misappropriation of funds. The results of the South Korean presidential election are in. Human rights lawyer Moon Jae-in was elected president today following a massive corruption scandal involving his predecessor, Park Geun-hye. Moon, who is a left-leaning liberal, has been critical of the conservatives' hardline stance on North Korea and has publicly stated that he is open to talks and eventual reunification with North Korea. President Trump today signed off on a plan to arm Kurdish rebels in Syria to fight against ISIS, despite strong objections from the Turkish government. Turkey, an important strategic partner in the fight against ISIS, has had a long-time insurgency conflict with the Kurds, who are concentrated in the western part of the country and along the border with Syria. President Trump is scheduled to meet with Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan later this month when the leader visits Washington, D.C. In France, centrist candidate Emmanuel Macron emerged victorious on Sunday in the final round of the presidential elections, beating Marine Le Pen of the Conservative National Front by 32% of the vote. Macron will take office on Friday, May 14th. And now we're going to go to Politicat's Caitlin Boudreau with the latest on the American Health Care Act. Caitlin?
Thanks, Andrew. The Republican bill to repeal and replace Obamacare narrowly passed the House last week by a vote of 217 to 213. The American Health Care Act, as it's called, is the GOP's second attempt at health care reform. It comes after an earlier version was pulled from a vote in the House in March after failing to gain enough support. Here's what you need to know about the bill. First, U.S. citizens will not be required by law to purchase health insurance under the proposed bill. That was a major tenet of Obamacare, but now there wouldn't be a yearly fee for not having health insurance. Instead, people would be assessed a fee in the future when they decide to purchase a plan. Next, some might see major changes to their benefits. The Affordable Care Act created a list of 10 essential benefits to be covered by all insurance. That list included things like maternity care and mental health care. Under the AHCA, states could apply for a waiver starting in 2020 to define their own list of essential benefits for insurance to cover. Opponents say the waiver could mean insurance policies for people with pre-existing conditions will become meaningless. Though the law requires pre-existing conditions be covered, there is a worry that insurance companies will stop paying for expensive treatments like chemotherapy because it could be optional for insurance to pay for those services. Third, the AHCA would restructure Medicaid. The bill would begin phasing out the Medicaid expansion implemented under Obamacare. States could continue enrolling people in Medicaid until 2020, then enrollment would freeze and no new people could receive benefits. Beyond that, the bill would allow for the rollback of Medicaid benefits. These cuts would save the government about $840 billion over 10 years, according to the Congressional Budget Office. Critics say these rollbacks will mean fewer benefits for nearly 74 million Medicaid beneficiaries. And finally, tax credits to help pay for insurance policies would be reduced for most Americans. Under Obamacare, tax credits were based primarily on income level, so low-income Americans were given more substantial tax breaks to help pay for insurance. Under the AHCA, tax credits would depend mostly on age, and all people in the same age range would receive roughly the same amount of support. Supporters of the bill say it will make insurance premiums go down so more people will be able to afford insurance even with reduced subsidies. Opponents say that's because insurance companies will be able to charge older people and sick people significantly higher rates, making coverage less affordable for those who need it most. Now, the AHCA still has to pass the more skeptical Senate before it's signed into law. It's likely the Senate will make significant changes to the bill, setting the stage for a potential showdown with House lawmakers who prefer a much more conservative approach. For Politicat, I'm Caitlin Boudreau.
Thanks, Caitlin. And for more, let's turn to our panel. We're joined now by Edmund Bannister, leader of the Center Party at NU Political Union, and Evan Whittort of College Republicans. Evan, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Well, let's start now with the aspect of the American Health Care Act that went viral after passing the House, and that's pre-existing conditions. This new bill would allow states to apply for waivers to charge people with pre-existing conditions more for insurance. Some of these pre-existing conditions include pregnancy, eating disorders, and being transgender. So Evan, I'd like to start with you. What is this going to mean for everyday Americans?
Yeah, so obviously this is definitely a big part. I mean, essentially the plan that was rolled out by the Republicans wasn't necessarily, in my view, supposed to be like a final draft. It was more of like an initial draft. So really what we're trying to do is push through a bill that would be a repeal of Obamacare. So as of right now, like that's the main goal, and it's being, so this is again a first draft, potentially could be something that would be revised and repealed eventually to get rid of Obamacare as of now.
Okay, Edmund, what are your thoughts?
Well, what the Trump administration and the Republican Congress is trying to do with these passages about pre-existing conditions, leaving it up to the states, is essentially to foist responsibility onto state legislatures and governors of these respective states for vast health care cuts for these people. The fact is that most states have Republican governors, most states have Republican legislatures, which means that most people in the United States who have pre-existing conditions are most likely going to get their health care benefits taken away. But the Trump administration doesn't want to take responsibility for that. That's why they're, leaving it up to the states.
All right, so Evan, as I said, the AHCA is now onto the Senate, and then as you said, many Senate Republicans are already saying that their version of the bill will probably be different than the one passed by the House. What changes can we expect to see then?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the changes that would be expected from the Senate would be to have like less power given to the like individual communities within the states. Potentially, there would also be a bit of like withdrawals of benefits for individual like plans, but potentially what people would want to see from that would be again like the repeal of the Obamacare Act. That would be the initial thing to push it through to kind of get that mediated and get that taken care of.
You think that these changes then are going to be? I mean, are they going to be good? Are they going to be really what we want to replace Obamacare?
Again, as of right now, I think this is a very rough draft of something that we want. There's a lot of opinions, of course, coming out of the House, but definitely there needs to be revisions. I think that the Senate can only benefit. You have a lot of people who are very qualified. It's a very important and dignified a Senate, and potentially, I think there would be a lot of benefits coming out of going through the Senate.
Edmund, you mentioned a few things that you had trouble with the bill. People from both the left and the right have said that there are problems right now with the Affordable Care Act, with Obamacare. Do you think that this bill right now has a possibility, if changes are made in the Senate, which it looks like they might, to actually be a good solution for everybody?
I don't really think so. Primarily because you can't fix a bill that was broken to begin with. You can fix a bill that was flawed, perhaps, but not one that is to its core rotten. This bill systematically strips away everything Obamacare was trying to accomplish, which is trying to expand health care coverage for Americans. Although Obamacare does have problems and it does have financing issues, I find it hard to see how taking $880 billion away from the Medicaid program while simultaneously cutting $5.5 trillion in taxes from the rich and wealthy corporations is a responsible thing for the Trump administration or the Republican Congress to be doing.
Okay, so we've seen this fight before for an Obamacare repeal, and it's failed before. So, Evan, why, even though this one has made it farther than the previous, it still does have the Senate to go. Why will this time be different? Why will it pass this time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is it's another iteration. There's been more time for people who are in charge, both in the House and also with Trump's administration, to get a little bit more of their opinions that would potentially be a little bit more partisan and a little bit more bipartisan. Potentially could get a little bit more ground, going through the Senate. So there has been a little bit of time to get a lot of the kinks worked out that were from the first iteration, and potentially could go through the second time. But of course, every iteration, again, I personally don't expect this to pass through the Senate as is. Of course, they mentioned that there are going to be a lot of changes to be made. So every iteration is going to be a little bit better, and hopefully this one will go through.
Evan?
I think that this bill has a serious chance of passage if they are able to put enough slapdash amendments on the existing bill to satisfy both the Freedom Caucus on the right and more moderate Republicans on the left. They have a chance of pushing it through. But again, it's very difficult to justify a bill to the American people that takes away health care coverage for millions of Americans.
And you don't think any way, with any amendments or any changes to this, that it could ever turn into a bill that both sides could agree on?
I don't think so. Democrats simply aren't going to vote for this because the entire objective of the bill is to strip away Obamacare, which is the foundation for Democratic policy on health care for the past 8 years. No matter what changes the Republicans make, it's still reducing health care coverage for millions of people.
Okay. All right, well, that's going to do it for us right now. We're going to take a short break, and when Politicat comes back, we'll talk testimony. Stay tuned.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
Cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for the sweet victories, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
Capitol Hill lawmakers are grappling today with statements made by former Acting Attorney General Sally Yates that former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn could be, quote, essentially blackmailed by the Russians. Yesterday, Yates, along with former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, testified before the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee in regards to the Russian hacking of the 2016 presidential election. Yates said that she alerted President Trump to the possibility Flynn could be blackmailed early on in the administration. However, Flynn was not fired until 2 weeks later. We're going to welcome back the panel now. We've got Edmund Bannister from Political Union, Evan Wittort from College Republicans. Guys, thanks again for being here. What questions does her testimony bring to light regarding how the White House handled these concerns? Edmund, I'll start with you.
Well, I think her testimony pointed to some serious incompetency within the Trump administration. What we now know is that Chris Christie, the first transition team manager for the Trump administration, did not think Michael Flynn was an appropriate choice. Obama warned President Trump in their conversation in December not to hire Michael Flynn because he was irresponsible. Sally Yates, the acting attorney general in the first part of the Trump administration, warned them not to hire him, and they still hired him. And even after they knew that he had lied to the vice president about inappropriate contacts with the Russian ambassador, it still took the Trump administration a week to fire him. That brings up some serious concerns about the competency of Trump's staff and his personal judgment.
Okay. Evan, what did you learn from the testimony?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sally Yates, just in general, so obviously a very good testimony on her part. Lots of different things that she brought up were known, but also very much highlighted in her testimony. It was my opinion personally that just hearing what she had to say, that like a lot of what she was saying, she was kind of upset about what happened, the way that she was terminated from the Justice Department, and yeah, it was my opinion that it was her job to it was her job to enforce what Trump has been saying, and whether or not Flynn should or should not have been hired. Maybe there were some concerns, but I think you're dealing with. I mean, obviously, working with politics, there are sides. Don't necessarily trust what everyone is saying, so potentially could have gone either way. I don't know if it necessarily speaks to the incompetency of the Trump administration as much as, like, yeah, of course there are red flags, but I think you just have to trust somebody that potentially knows what they're doing.
Okay. So after President Trump made the claim that President Obama and the Obama administration had wiretapped the Trump campaign, former Director of Intelligence James Clapper went on NBC's Meet the Press and denied that accusation. However, it had since been revealed that the FBI did obtain a court-approved wiretap on one Trump foreign policy advisor with Russian ties. Clapper testified he was unaware of the FBI investigation into the Trump campaign and stood by his statements. Edmund, I'm going to start with you again. What does this new entry into this investigation mean for the Russian investigation, and could it hinder it going forward?
I don't think it can really hinder it. The National Intelligence has been asked, and Congress is currently investigating possible ties between the Trump administration and Russia. The fact that a Trump administration staffer with serious connections to the Russian government was the subject of a wiretap shouldn't be that surprising. What we do know is that Donald Trump, when he tweeted that out, had no knowledge that any security agencies were wiretapping him. That was an accusation he made completely out into the blue, and it was intended to smear Barack Obama by implying that Barack Obama was attempting to undermine his presidency before it even started. And that claim was absolutely inaccurate.
Do you feel that tweet was completely out of the blue and wasn't supported by anything?
I mean, I think initially the initial reports are very much that it was out of the blue. I personally am of the mindset that as more information comes out, I think we'll see that there was actual intent behind that tweet, and there has been or there will be facts proven to show that it wasn't entirely unfounded. If there was a case, there has to be some reason why there was wiretapping to begin with. I don't think it would be entirely something that would come entirely out of the blue. I mean, something that we've never heard a political candidate offer up as far as something that happened. So in my head, whether or not it was wiretapping, I don't know. But there has to be some reason why that was brought up, or any false or unfair treatment of Trump would have been brought up in the first place.
So the revelation then that Obama did, in fact, get the court-approved wiretap, and that Clapper testified he was unaware of that. What do you think that'll do with the Russian investigation? Yeah,
I mean, I think it just that specifically makes things very difficult it proves Trump's point a little bit to some extent. I think obviously it's not a good sign when anybody involved in an administration has ties to somebody or not somebody, but a group as powerful as a country like Russia. But I definitely think it's potentially good for the Trump administration because that's something that he said happened that seemed unfounded. That was proved wrong.
Okay. I'd like to shift the focus slightly on the very recent developments. As we know, we mentioned at the top of the broadcast, just a few hours ago, President Trump fired James Comey, who is now the former FBI director, ostensibly for mistakes in his testimony to this congressional panel last week. The announcement rocked D.C. And the president's administration, as we know it, is currently under investigation, as we've been talking, for its ties with Russia, some of that investigation being undertaken by the FBI. So guys, this is big news, biggest headline of the day. What is going on is a big question. And Evan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, for the research that I did looking into it, it was an interesting development. To me, Comey seemed like he was a pretty good guy, and it wasn't 100% clear why he was let go. But it was my opinion that if it was going to be like a political statement of some kind, it should have been done on the first day of the presidency. Obviously, Comey was very polarizing at the beginning. And therefore, I think if it was a political statement by the Trump administration, it should have been done earlier. And I think for whatever reason now, it was the straw that broke the camel's back, kind of a culmination of events and things that happened with him.
Any idea why they waited so long?
I think he was just a very polarizing person. There were a lot of slip-ups on his end, a lot of things that kind of made you scratch your head of things that he said, and it was just my take that. Eventually, at some point, they just decided that they couldn't go on with it anymore.
Edmund, what's your take?
I mean, I think they're blatantly firing the person charged with investigating them for ties to Russia. This is more than just a slight correlation. It's firing the person responsible for investigating you because they're investigating you. This is the type of thing that Nixon did during Watergate, tried to dismiss members of the government that were responsible for investigating the scandal, and it's what Trump is doing now. And undermining the integrity of a supposedly neutral law enforcement agency like the FBI is an incredibly dangerous thing for a president to do, and it fundamentally undermines the rule of law that Donald Trump is tasked as president to uphold.
You think this really has the possibility to be as big as Watergate?
I don't know if it has the possibility of being as big as Watergate. What I do know is that whatever they are investigating, the Trump administration is sufficiently afraid of it to dismiss the people responsible for investigating it.
You think this was a fair move, Evan?
I mean, I think if it was going to be anything political, it would have been earlier in the administration. Essentially, what some of the insiders were saying was that he had just ultimately lost trust of the trust of the public. I don't think it was anything that was foul play. I think it was totally just had lost the trust and the opinion of the people.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to go to a short break. We'll be back with more Politicat right after this.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
Welcome back to Politicat. As the Senate braces for impact with the American Health Care Act, Senate Republicans are gearing up for a leadership shakeup. The upper echelons of Senate Majority Mitch McConnell's GOP leadership team are up for grabs, including the Majority Whip, Policy Chairman, Conference Chairman, and Vice Chairman. Currently, those positions are held by John Cornyn, John Thune, John Barrasso, and Roy Blunt, respectively. McConnell is planning to stay on and run for re-election in 2020, which would make him the longest-serving Senate leader in U.S. history, and unsurprisingly, not everyone's happy about that. Cornyn has been regarded as a favorite for the party leader position, and some of the other members are expecting a promotion. But that can't happen if McConnell stays in place. We're going to bring back in the panel Edmund Bannister, Political Union, Evan Whitworth from College Republicans. Guys, thanks again. So let's take a look at this. Taking a look at the Senate Majority leadership right now, it looks like a bit of an old boys club. Now there's a new generation of younger Republicans, many of whom were elected in 2012, whose names are being thrown around for the lower positions. We've got Cory Gardner from Colorado, Deb Fischer of Nebraska, Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia. They've all been mentioned as contenders for vice chairman. What should we look out for in 2018? I'll throw it to you, your college Republicans.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as far as what to look out for, so generally just the way that these positions work, within the Senate. So you have people who are charismatic leaders, thinking Ted Cruz, thinking somebody like Marco Rubio. Those people win their votes and they campaign based on having a face. They talk on morning talk shows to kind of get their name out, get their face out to get votes that way. These specific positions are kind of, I've heard them described as down in the weeds positions. They're positions where the people who are taking them, their names and faces aren't widely known. I'm sure of the four, at most you would recognize maybe one, or the general public would recognize maybe one or two of those names from outside their state. So the way that these people are elected is they are going out and doing kind of the dirty work in the Senate, getting votes, or like for example, the major whip of the Senate is somebody who goes out and tries to rally the Republican votes and see who's going to vote one way or the other. Not exactly a sterling position, but the way that they get their votes is to get kind of power within the party and power within the Senate. Then they can go out and go back to their state and say, all right, here's what I've done for the state, here's the power that I hold within, so they don't have to campaign how a normal politician might do. So as you said, there's a bit of a shakeup now. Generally, the way that these positions work is once somebody is removed, so let's say somebody like Mitch McConnell, once he decides to step down, essentially the rest of them kind of shift up, and it's kind of not working that way. So it'll be interesting to see having Mitch McConnell, if he's reelected, which he probably will be. He'll be in his 80s by the time he's through. So it'll be interesting to see how, as you said, how the Republicans kind of work that way.
The guys doing the dirty work. I
Yeah.
like that. So Edmund, what is this? Same question. What are we going to look out for in 2018 if the guys doing the dirty work get shaken up?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, Mitch McConnell is one of the best political operators in Senate history. There's a reason why he's been majority leader, minority leader for so long, and it's because he is incredibly good at his job. So I don't think that it's particularly surprising that the Republicans don't want to get rid of him immediately. What I do think is that the Republicans have faced setbacks recently. They've also experienced some really bad image problems. For example, not having a single woman on the 13-person panel to improve the healthcare bill. That was a big error. So I think they need to show that we're shaking up the leadership, we're making an attempt to be more competent, and we're trying to actually, change the way we operate. Whether they'll be successful, I don't really know.
Okay. We're going to take a break. More Politicat after this.
Why spend your entire life looking for some on-ramp to the road to opportunity when there's already a well-traveled path? So you may be wondering, what does that path look like? Is it paved with gold? Well, here's a hint. It's actually paved with purple. Northwestern University. Your road starts here.
Welcome back. We'd like to introduce a new segment now that we call our Politician Highlight of the Week. This week we'd like to highlight Senator Bob Casey. Last Wednesday, the two-term Democrat from Pennsylvania discovered that an immigrant family in his state was about to be deported. The mother and child had come to America escaping gang violence, and while Casey said the child was eligible for relief, both were scheduled to go back to Honduras that afternoon. Casey began pleading with President Trump, White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, and Secretary of Homeland Security John Kelly to stop the deportation, but he decided to plead in a rather unconventional way. Senator Casey took to Twitter, unleashing 29 tweets over about a 3.5-hour period, both explaining the situation and publicly calling on officials to act. One of the tweets read, quote, "I just had a picture of this 5-year-old come across my desk. He's adorable," and wrote that he had nowhere to go. 2 minutes later, he tweeted, quote, @RealDonaldTrump, if you're on Twitter, call at DHS Gov Secretary Kelly and tell him this makes no sense. Casey then went on MSNBC Live to plead his case, but it appears that it didn't work. At 5:42 Eastern Time, he tweeted, quote, "Still no definitive answer on 5-year-old and mother. Last word at IceGov on the family, gone. This is a profound outrage." And that brings us now to tonight's final word. The views expressed in this segment are not necessarily the views of NNN or Northwestern University. They are the views of the Politicat editorial staff. The family that Senator Casey was trying to keep in America left behind a life filled with violence and poverty, the likes of which most of us cannot conceive. According to Casey, the mother and child were fleeing for their lives from Honduran drug gangs after the mother witnessed the murder of her cousin. They didn't come to America to steal our jobs or to leech off of our health care. They came here to stay alive. They saw this country as the shining hill that it portrays itself as, and like so many people before them, chose to flee their past for the promise of freedom from fear in America. Instead, we sent them right back into violence and fear, and tragically, very likely their deaths. Immigration policy has been the topic of conversation at least once an hour on every 24-hour cable news channel since Donald Trump announced his candidacy for president back in May of 2015. To lump this story in with the everyday punditry would be irresponsible, so we won't. The story of this family is very powerful, and what we should learn is very clear. Rather, tonight we'd like to discuss the fact that the senior senator from Pennsylvania, with power and access to parts of government we probably don't even know exist, petitioned the President of the United States on Twitter, something that you or I could do right now. An article in Politico called it a, quote, unsuccessful experiment in which a legislator tried to hold government officials accountable for their actions in real time. A few weeks ago, John Dickerson of CBS News made headlines after President Trump abruptly ended his interview in the Oval Office when Dickerson wouldn't stop asking about Trump's comments on former President Obama. Earlier in that interview, though, Dickerson and Trump discussed the Oval Office and how insulating the White House was, calling it a cocoon. While the president may have been referring to his personal life now that he's dealing with Secret Service, it's clear that this cocoon dangerously extends into his work life as well. We've learned through interviews like Dickerson's that the president likes to surround himself with people who agrees with him. Senator Casey felt that the only way to break through that cocoon was to beg publicly on Twitter, and still, neither the Department of Homeland Security, nor the Chief of Staff, nor the President even responded to that. Nobody knows everything. No single person is capable of fully viewing any issue from all sides. And that's why bipartisanship and compromise are so important to the democratic politics of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Pride can be a hard thing to overcome, but when you put it on a scale with innocent lives, I think we all know which way the scales should tip. That's all the time we have for tonight. I'd like to thank my guests Edmund Bannister and Evan Winfort. We'll be back next Tuesday with more Politicat. For now, I'm Andrew Merica. Good night.